But joining us first is the CEO of the King Center, Dr. Bernice A. King, who, as I've been thinking about over the last few days, she calls her mother the architect of the King legacy. Of course, the King Center is named after Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. I believe Dr. Bernice A. King has a specific charge to get nonviolence across the globe. And we have these virtual spaces. So I was thinking today, I'm going to start calling her like the architect of global teaching on nonviolence, because that's what she's doing. That's how she's showing up in the world to get nonviolence everywhere for everyone. And so as we get started with this beloved community talks, we're going to have Dr. Bernice A. King come on and join us. Good evening.
Good evening. How are you, my friend?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm wonderful.
I've seen you everywhere this weekend. You've been,
Yeah,
you've been traveling.
I've been to New York and back.
Yeah.
Today at the King Center to lay a wreath at my father's crypt, but my father and mother side by side, of course. And I said a few words there. So I've been all over the place.
Yeah.
And
But
now
you've been
I'm
showing up
seated.
powerfully. I've been sharing with people, as this is also the anniversary of Beyond Vietnam, how that space in New York City at Riverside Church shifted Saturday as you started to read the end of that speech. And I know we want to talk about a number of things tonight, but I know we need to mention too the agony of choosing a call to conscience. I know that's something you wanted to highlight. So as you begin this beloved community talk and share any comments when we're done with that piece, could we talk about that for a moment? The agony of
I mean, in that speech, my father said that the calling to speak is often a vocation of agony, but one must speak. And that's where he found himself on April 4th, 1967, when he publicly, officially came out against the war in Vietnam. I want people to understand that my father was a leader of conscience. I mean, he always wanted to stay aligned with his conscience. And because he believed in the eradication of what he called the triple evils of poverty, racism, and militarism, he knew that he could no longer segregate his own conscience as he fought against, segregation in the South. He could not segregate all of these interests because he saw them as intersectional. But it wasn't easy. I want people to understand that although he was a leader of conscience, he agonized because he had to take a very strong step in courage and faith, knowing that in the end, there were those who would misunderstand his position. And so he had to decide, am I going to stand in this space where my colleagues in civil rights who stood right by my side as we fought for the Civil Rights Act and the Voting Rights Act are now saying, Dr. King, don't mix the two, don't blend them, don't create an enemy of President Johnson, who's been, a friend of our work. He had to consider the criticism, harsh criticism that he would get from the media. And then he had to consider the fact that his own board, the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, would not stand with him or allow him to take that platform as head of the SCLC. There was one member, Reverend Otis Moss Jr., who's still living today, who was a member of the board, who did personally support him. And so that agony for him obviously took a lot of courage, a lot of strength, a lot of faith. But as he said so eloquently in an interview he did with Mike Douglas, and you remember that interview where they asked him, are you concerned that you may have fallen out of favor
right.
With President Johnson by taking this stance against the Vietnam War? And he said, well, that's not what's most important. He said, what's important to me is that I not fall out of favor with what is is I'm trying to remember the exact word, that I not fall out of favor with what is true and what my conscience tells me is just and right. And then this is the striking thing he went on to say, is that I much rather stay in favor with my conscience than to be concerned about people who may not understand the position that I take. Now that, to me,
Wow.
is ultimate leadership. When you are willing to stand for what's right, what's just, and what's true, no matter what the cost is, because you want to stay aligned with your conscience. You don't want to do what he said is the popular thing. You're not concerned about what's politic and expedient or safe, but you're concerned about doing what conscience tells you is right and speaking out against that what was the right thing. And my mother really was the person who continued to encourage him just before that time. Martin, we need your voice in the peace movement, because my mother had been in the peace movement since before she met my dad. And she had been participating in a number of peace conferences around the world. And she felt that his moral voice was needed in that movement. And so she was with him, even though everybody else turned on him. She was right there with him, holding him up, encouraging him. And I think that's really what helped him to go ahead and take that public stance.
Wow. And there's so much there, Dr. King. I believe as we go through this conversation, these two conversations with Shane Claiborne and Dr. Cornell West in this Beloved Community Talks experience, we'll explore what you're talking about, how as we discuss militarism, it's very important that we discuss it from the perspective of a call to conscience. Your dad demonstrated that in Beyond Vietnam in that speech, but also as he began to talk more and more about the war in Vietnam and about militarism, imperialism, the notion of empire and colonialism, all of these things he talks about extensively. A lot of people don't know because we relegate him to I Have a Dream. But as we segue, what would you consider to be, as people are listening to this Beloved Community Talks, one thing that you think people should remember in terms of your father as we move into this talk? You talked about his agonizing over this, but how can people, I'll phrase the question this way, and I even want, if you're watching this right now, one of the things you can tweet right now is, I want to accept a call to conscience. I want everybody to tweet that. Whether you believe it right now or not. You may be saying, no, sister, I don't really believe I want to do that. But just I want to accept a call to conscience and use those hashtags. They were hashtag Beloved Community Talks, hashtag militarism, hashtag MLK. And I'll abbreviate that question for you, Dr. King. When people want to consider accepting a call to conscience, why is that particularly critical right now? Why is it important that we answer a call to conscience?
Well, our world is in trouble. I mean, it's simply, for me, I mean, we're headed in a dangerous pathway of destruction as a world. And we need people who are willing to step in the middle and be willing to sacrifice to say this way of handling conflict, this way of and conflict, I mean, from personally, interpersonally, conflict in Congress, conflict, in society, conflict between nations. This way of handling things is detrimental to us, and it's going to lead to self-destruction. And so we need people, who are willing in their various spheres of influence to stand up, even if it means standing alone. I mean, when Daddy came, he came to the point where he said, if I'm the lone voice standing for nonviolence, even if everybody else want to use violence, I'll stand alone, because he earnestly loved humanity. He valued the dignity and worth, and he believed people had the right to survive, to live. And so, he was willing to make that necessary sacrifice in courage and in faith and in strength because of his love of humanity. And you may call it extremist. He said he was on good company being an extremist for love, because that's who Jesus Christ was.
Absolutely.
And so I would say to everybody, it's time to be that extremist again. We have to be an extremist for love, for justice, for humanity, not to the point of becoming obsessed, where we become the very thing that we're trying to eradicate. But we do it in a way where the dignity and the value and the worth of people are still upheld. And so, you know, I'm looking forward to this discussion tonight from my two brothers. And thank you for hosting this tonight. And I'm going to be listening in and taking some good notes.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Dr. King. Thank you. Thank you to you, to your family. We remember you today. We're praying for you. We know all over the world we're commemorating this day, but you're a family. And this is different than how we remember the death of loved ones, and that you're doing it with the world. And so
yes.
Thank you for taking the time to share with us this evening.
Thank you.